We'll get into it. Oh, hello, Mark, online. Thank you very much. And I've got an apology from Tyler for about 10, 15 minutes. It's going to be a bit late. No declarations of interest, so we'll crack on into it. We have a few people who can't make it this morning, the submitters, but we have Mark and Claire here on time and ready to go. So fire away. Good to see you.
Is the clock up?
Yep.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm Mark, this is Claire, probably figured that much out. And who are we? So we are both on the committee for Atlas Quarter, which was, I think, the first apartment development built after the quakes in Christchurch, on Wells Street in the south of the city, just behind Pack and Save. We're also just in the very early stages of trying to start a neighbourhood association, because there doesn't seem to be one covering all these new apartment developments in our corner of the city, and we think it would be very good to have one and have some networking going on, and we've called ourselves Concentric, Christchurch Ōtautahi Neighbours. Nothing like a really complicated pun. And yeah, we love living in the city centre. We're fully vested in, I guess, what the council's trying to achieve in terms of, you know, the higher density housing and a climate-friendly city and a vibrant city with a really strong community. And so we're just really glad to be here and happy to do what we can to help that succeed. Oh yeah, so this is where we live, Wells Street. This came from our neighbour, Oliver Huggins. So all the green roofs you can see on there are residential. So it's an area that before the earthquakes was more industrial, but over time it's become a more and more, I guess, residential and also commercial area. A really exciting place to live.
So if you move on to here, you can see the slide on the left is the development, which is done right, the one central, and how it can be done right with new infrastructure, walkways, etc., is because it was sort of a new blank canvas, wasn't it? And it's also not only a new blank canvas, it's majority residential precinct, as opposed to, if you go to the next slide, Mark, as opposed to Wells Street, which prior to the earthquake was totally industrial area, and then it changed to more of a mix of new and repurposed buildings. But the streetscape still looks like a wasteland. Our street's a mixture of residential, hospo, retail, and that's why we need appropriate infrastructure. We need foot and mixed accessibility, we need rubbish and recycling, and maybe a bit of street furniture and some plants to make it look like, you know, this is a nice place for people to wander around. And yeah, it's also got some surface flooding issues. So if you want to go shopping on a rainy day, you've got to take your red vans. Now, one of the main reasons that Wells Street still feels like it was pre-quake is the speed limit hasn't changed. So the main roads adjacent have reduced to 30, but the speed limit on Wells Street and Dundas Street stays at 50. So Wells Street in particular is pretty skinny with cars parked on both sides, and some of the cars aren't very careful about how fast they go. They're not really going 50, they're going 60 or 70. So one of the things that we're suggesting is that maybe reduce the speed to 30 and even think about making the street one way. I did do a bit of a straw poll with some of the businesses in Wells Street. I took to 11 of them out of about 20, and all of them agreed with the overarching principle of making the street more pedestrian friendly, and all of them agreed with reducing the maximum speed, and most were in agreement with making a one-way proposal. So yeah, it's not like we feel like a bunch of aliens there sometimes. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, and so we noticed in the draft annual plan that there's a proposal to extend the city vacant differential to more places, including the commercial part of Sydenham. We're not actually included in that city vacant differential on Wells Street and Dundas Street, and we actually have quite a few, well, 3 that I have counted properties that look really untidy and could definitely use some, dusty, and so we feel like if you're going to have the city vacant differential in Sydenham, it would be really good to just close the gap and have it in our neighbourhood as well. That being said, one of the three on here is actually doing some development right now, so we don't actually know what's going to happen. We think maybe they're prettying up the car park. We will see. But yeah, it'd be really nice to have an incentive for all of the neighbours to contribute to that vision of making it a really beautiful neighbourhood. There was one thing I wanted to say as well, because we've got plenty of time. This imagery belongs to the council. It's amazing quality. It's amazing how far you can zoom in, but it's a really untapped resource because most of the public don't know that it exists here. The only way that something like this can get onto the likes of Google Maps is if staff at the council actually upload it into the system. So I've talked to Lens. They said they can't do it. I've talked to Canterbury Images, and they said talk to Lens, but I think it would have to be someone at the council. We could get this in Google Maps and have much better quality imagery than what we have at the moment. Sorry, that's a unrelated point. Last year we came to you about curbside collection because we don't receive council service because we have rubbish rooms. We couldn't fill the street up with those small bins. It would be a chaos. So we pay for a private company to come and collect the rubbish, and you very kindly gave us a rebate to account for the fact that we're actually having to pay for our own rubbish collection. So we're very grateful for that. Just looking through all the details of the annual plan, I noticed that it actually costs more to opt into the rubbish collection if you don't already receive it than what you receive as a rebate to opt out. And I also noticed that amount that it costs to opt into rubbish collection is increasing by 9.9% in the draft annual plan. So I guess it's just a suggestion to think about whether the two things should be the same, like whether the rebate should be the same as the fee for opting in, and also even if they shouldn't be the same, just to think about whether the rebate should be increased in line with inflation or in line with what the fee for opting in has increased by. You might have also noticed in my written submission, I was a bit concerned or confused by $1.4 million that had been flagged for curbside collection alternatives to curbside collection in the city centre. I've since received a bit of clarification from the council staff member, and it sounds like part of it is just the wording is actually a bit inaccurate, and there's actually a few external factors that will influence what might actually happen with that money in the end. So I don't have any concerns about that 1.4 million. It looks like it's flagged, and they still need to do a bit of work to identify exactly how it will be used. One other thing for rubbish for me is, so I don't have a car. I sold it to live in the city centre, and to reduce my carbon footprint, which means that the eco drop facilities aren't accessible to me. So I can't actually thoughtfully dispose of things that I don't want anymore. I just have to throw them in the red bin if they're not recyclable. So it could be quite nice to have some kind of recycling facility or eco drop or something in a more central location for people who can't go to those far-flung locations. So yeah, something worth thinking about. And I guess the only other thing we really wanted to just, speak in support of cycle lanes, speak in support of good public transport infrastructure and making sure that it's safe and making sure that it's accessible. We all love using the buses in Christchurch, and we want it to be better. We have bike rooms in our complex so that we can all cycle out to different places as well. And yeah, like I say, I've sold my car, so I feel like now I need the council to lift its game and make sure that the alternatives are usable as well. Thank you very much. See, I've left 55 seconds for questions.
No, you've done very well. You've done very well. Melanie, and then Kelly.
Thank you. The question I had was about tauranga in the meeting rooms that you mentioned here. I was just wondering if you could sort of talk about the types of people you think would be affected by that charge that's proposed.
Yeah, so it's quite hard to find spaces in the city that are accessible to community groups. I know my partner is trying to set up kind of a rainbow network in safe spaces that may be a bit less public, so that people who are maybe a bit vulnerable have somewhere where they can come together and meet each other and feel safe. And so, library spaces are one of the options that are accessible for things like that. And so the meeting rooms, to me, they're an important community resource, and they're a lot smaller than those other big spaces in Turanga. And the proposal at the moment is to make those tiny meeting rooms cost the same as the big spaces. And I think, they cater to different types of people, and so I think those small spaces should be accessible to community groups.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Great presentation. I'm really interested in the recycling. Could you just explain that? So, basically, you don't have bins?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So we have recycling bins, we have green bins, we have red bins. The point I was making is if you own a car and you want to get rid of your TV or your computer or your lounge suite or something smaller that's still in good working condition, you just drive it to the eco drop. There's a lot of smaller things, like, I don't know, batteries. You're not supposed to put them in the red bin. You're not supposed to put them in the yellow bin. You can't really do anything with them. So it's just a suggestion that maybe a lot of those things that can't currently be disposed of thoughtfully, there could be options.
Yeah, I just wondered about the body corporate for the unit that you're staying in. Maybe they might have a solution. Yeah, but it's a really good thing, an honourable thing to look to solve. So yeah, good work. I don't have the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
very
very
much. Very much appreciate it.
So should we see if Mr. Fullerton is
No, there's no one there. So, I think we have the...
Marshlands?
Is that Marshlands Hall Trust, isn't it? Yes. Thank you for coming along a bit earlier, because it's filled in a little gap that we had. So we'll fire you in now. That's brilliant. Good to see you.
Are you able to drive them? Let's click it. Right. Okay. Tēnā koutou. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to our annual plan submission this morning. My name is Sian Ruth, and this is Adele Mitchell. And we have Joanne Noble-Nesbitt and Lila Mitchell helping. So Adele, Joanne and myself, we are three of the trustees of the Marshland Hall Trust.
We're here today to ask to work in partnership with Council on our project. This will be a community-led and run project, but we cannot move forward until we purchase the land. Whilst you may be aware that we do have funds of our own, we've been advised by grant funders that we cannot use these funds to purchase the land, as that will then leave us with no funds for the project itself. And they cannot then provide us with grants. Effectively, we must keep our funds to be used on the building itself to ensure that we have access to grant funding. We're asking that 1.3 million be allocated under the annual plan so that the Trust may purchase the land.
There is definitely a need for this facility. Council have already identified a need in the Community Network Facilities Plan for a community facility in the northeast of Christchurch, which is where we are located. There's strong support for the facility, including our local school, community and sporting groups. So we know that demand for the facility will be high. We keep talking about community, and it's important to remember that a large proportion of this community are displaced residents from the red zone or the wider east side of Christchurch, who are still trying to rebuild their sense of community. We have had feedback from a number of new residents who tell us that they live there but don't yet feel part of a community like they did in the red zone. The new facility will provide a meeting place to facilitate that coming together.
Whilst unable to secure the land, we've been busy raising our profile in the community and working on smaller fundraising projects. We held a very successful community day in November last year, with over 1,000 people attending, including local resident Olympian Tom Walsh for the gumboot throwing competition. Feedback has been very positive and we have secured this year's date. This will be an annual event. Further smaller fundraising events are planned.
We're very keen to get this project underway, but until we get the land, the project cannot get any momentum. And that is why we are asking you for your assistance now. Thank you for your time. Any questions? Thank you. And we hope you like the cupcakes.
Bribery will get you everywhere.
Absolutely.
That's lovely. Kelly, I'm sure has got some questions. Have you, Kelly?
Thank you, ladies. Fantastic presentation. Could you talk a little bit about the number of people that are living in this particular area and how many there were 8 years ago after the earthquakes?
I suppose, if you talk to some of the long-term residents of the Marshland district, they'll tell you it has changed hugely. 8 to 10 years ago, there weren't that many residents in the area, but since then, we've had Preston's Park, there's the Limes. So there's probably, we've gone from very few houses to about at least 2,000 new houses in that period of time. So you're looking probably at least 5,000 new residents in the area that are looking to have a facility to use, to come together. And I think we found that too when we had the community day, just the number of people that came through.
As well as a brand new school that's basically overflowing, and that school cannot house their entire school in their hall, and they cannot at one time, so they cannot have whole school assemblies, they cannot have a production, they have to stagger their events, so they're very supportive.
Excellent. And so your plans for the facility, what's it going to look like is in terms of the different activities that will be done there, and also tenants? You know, do you have tenants?
Yeah, so the basis is going to be a full-size court, of which you will have seen there is a big lack across Christchurch of indoor court facilities. We have New Zealand Wheelchair Rugby very interested in making a base. Canterbury Basketball are crying out for courts. They're very interested. The school is obviously interested in using it as a facility. That's Marshland's primary school. And we are talking with lots of local community groups who are very interested. So it's almost like if we build it, they will come.
We also have the likes of Parafed Canterbury,
Yes.
who are very keen to be involved. And there are other community groups that provide amazing programs that are also talking to us to say, you know, is this a possible home for them, which would work for both groups.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Sam, who doubles as a cupcake tester.
I think I've tested far too
And
many
I'm
cupcakes
sure
since my
if you're going to have a cafe down there, it will go very well.
I will live there. I just wonder, and maybe it may be something, Kelly, we talk about offline. I just wonder if there's any other land in the area that, and it's probably a question that, is there any other land that that you've identified that may be suitable or is surplus to requirements?
We initially looked to see if we could actually build on the domain, the Marshland domain, which is council-owned land, but we got told basically that no, they would not allow any more buildings on that land, which is why we then had to look around to see what was available. The benefit of the land that we've identified is it's right next to the domain. It's on a slice of land that is owned by the developer of Preston's Park.
Yeah.
So
So
the downside is we're going to have to pay for it.
how much land are you looking for?
It's about 3,000 squares or something, 2,000 squares. It's not that.
It's not
No.
big.
No.
Yeah.
I wonder if maybe it's an action that comes out.
Well, I think we have our notes. We're obviously in listening mode. We'll be able to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. Yesterday we were raising actions with Lynn.
It's probably worth noting that Marston's Hill Trust had dealt with the developer who had it earmarked for housing, and then once the developer heard that there was a community facility possibly being planned in the area, actually decided to not do the housing and wait for Marston's Hill Trust to get into a position where they might be able to purchase it. So, which is quite rare, I would have thought.
The developer has been bending over backwards to help Marston's Hill Trust.
Yes,
It would
he's
just be-
paid for all the design work so far.
Yeah, it would just be useful to understand why we can't use some of the domain lane.
We'll investigate that.
Okay. And lastly is Pauline.
It's logged as a question, and
I'm okay because I was kind of wondering where this bit of land was, but it's in Preston's obviously now. And also keep a record of every bit of pro bono work that's been done, because that's actually fundraising that you can add to your cause as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cheers.
Thank you very much for coming in. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Breakfast.
David Close here.
Yep, David's here. Yep.
Yeah.
Hello, David. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, guys. Yep, we're. Oi, James, we're here. Right. The floor is yours, David.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. And I trust that we'll get a bit more than the allotted 5 minutes since we've arrived in time and you're free.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yes, thank you. Welcome the questions. We welcome the opportunity to be with you again. We believe that local government is hugely important in the lives of ordinary people. And we believe that the City Council sells itself short in that it doesn't tell people, remind people what it's doing. Instead of talking about rates as being a burden, the City Council ought to be telling the people that rates are the best value in town. If you look at the range of services, basic services and other recreational services which the council provides, it's extraordinarily good value for money. And the council should be saying that rather than apologising for a rates increase which is incredibly modest. I see that farmers are going to be paying another 60 cents on average per week. And the ordinary rate payer, $3.50. The business rate payer, $18 a week. These extras are very, very minor increases when you consider the cost of, say, the internet or the cost of a coffee. So we believe the council ought to be telling the people more about what the council is doing. You've got a great scheme over there in Littleton to take the sewage out of Littleton Harbour, but we hear very little about that. We don't get progress reports. Down on the way to New Brighton, there are great big excavations going on, which I'm sure the Mayor knows lots about. But even though I'm a reasonably well-informed citizen, I don't really know what is going on there. People need to be told. And I think there's an over-reliance on social media. There's a wealth of information available on the council's website, but you've got to go and look for it. And most people aren't particularly motivated. So we believe the council is selling itself short in that way. Congratulations on keeping the uniform charge low. It's an equity issue because capital value rating is undoubtedly a fundamentally fair system. And the publicity recently in the newspapers about the accumulated wealth of the top 1% of New Zealand, the 311 families or whatever, is a reminder that the only way in which we are taxing accumulated wealth these days is really through the rates, which is why some business people don't like paying rates. There are two issues in particular that we want to talk to you about. The first is our hardy annual of housing. our Labour Electorate Committee has been coming to you year after year to plead with the council to be more proactive in housing. 10 years ago, was it 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever it was, the council decided it would hand over its responsibilities to the Ōtautahi Trust. That is a model which could have worked, but the council has not resourced the trust. The trust's got very minimal resources, and the result of that is that the City Council and the trust have fewer rental houses now than they had in 2010. In other words, you still haven't caught up with the backlog from the earthquakes. And I think that is a disgrace. I'm sure you think it is too, if you like to think about it. But by delegating it to the Ōtautahi Trust, you have shelved responsibility. And there's nothing more important than housing. One of the problems with delegating the authority in that way is that you are no longer in touch with need. If, like some of us, you're involved in trying to find homes for the homeless, it is very, very difficult. The council rightly supports Housing First, which is a great organisation. But Housing First can only find houses for people if those houses are available. There's an absolute shortage of single-room accommodation, especially over in the east. To try and find accommodation for homeless people is very difficult because respectable landlords, understandably, they want references from previous tenancies. They want good character references. Have you ever been evicted? If you've got a prison record and probably on drugs, it's very, very difficult. So there's a need for an increase in the stock, housing stock, especially a single bedroom accommodation. The other problem with the model, the income related rents model, under which Ōtautahi Trust operates, is that it all goes through work and income. It's work and income that really allocates the tenancies. And the effect of having a shortage of accommodation and everything going through work and income means that the demographic in the council housing has changed. There is a very large proportion of high needs people concentrated in these complexes. If you have half a dozen high needs people in a complex of 30 people, then you'll find that those half dozen people conform to the culture within that complex. If you have a majority of high needs people in these complexes, then what happens is that they establish the culture. And that can have great difficulties. The proportion of high needs people in some of these complexes is very considerable. And neither the council nor Ōtautahi are supported in the way that they need to be to provide for their needs. You've only got to walk around some of these complexes to see that a lot of the tenants are not coping. And we deinstitutionalised our mental hospitals and so on a number of years ago. It's great. It's called community care, but so often it's community neglect. So we really think that the council ought to be lobbying the government for funding to support high needs people in social housing.
Thank you, David. How are you getting on there, mate? How much longer do you think you've got?
Oh, another 5 minutes?
Oh, no. Because our next customer is right behind you.
I thought I wasn't due to 11:15, Your Worship.
Yeah, but you've had well over 5 minutes. But if you want to wrap it up,
the other thing we wish to draw attention to is the council's management of Christchurch City Holdings and the companies. We all know that there have been some problems recently, and we think this stems from the council allowing a sort of standard corporate culture to develop in City Holdings and in the companies which City Holdings holds on behalf of the citizens of Christchurch and the council. There's a view which is promulgated by the Institute of Directors that the only people who are fit to sit on as directors of companies are people who've sat on boards of other companies, so-called professional directors. I've sat on boards alongside professional directors, and some of them are very, very good. And some of them are mediocre, to put it mildly. They're seat warmers. The councils need to realise that you become experts in the management of utilities and infrastructure. When you're first elected, you've got a lot to learn. When you've been here for 2 or 3 years, you understand the principles of managing infrastructure, which in effect is a matter of managing your long-term investment and your maintenance. You become experts and are far more qualified than the average professional director to sit on boards of directors dealing with infrastructure and utilities. So we really think it's important that the council should have a majority of directors on city holdings, and preferably, I would think the chairman of city holdings ought to be a city councillor, because after all, city holdings is 100% owned. So we really think that needs attention. It means bucking the trend that is fashion, which is promulgated by the Institute of Directors, who I might say are a very self-interested group. I'm not against professional directors. Some of them are very, very good, as I said. But to allow that corporate culture to develop, I think, leads to all sorts of problems, and I don't need to tell you what they are.
Thank you very much, David. That's very enlightening.
Okay.
Thanks for coming in. Good on you.
Thank you.
So,
I'm
Dominic?
giving you 10 minutes extra. Thank you, Mr. Ian.
Good man. Welcome, Dominic.
Hi. With the rates increase, it's commonly been seen over the past few years, it's 5.5 or in that 5% bracket continually, no matter what, and somehow it's just always trimmed down to a lower budget or higher budget in that bracket as the final rates increase. Yet this can't be sustainable long term for a council to continually increasing rates on a 5% bracket or even higher to fund even pet projects of that staff put up to yourselves to fund and provide for the city. One of those pet projects or pet layouts being the cycleways. Some of them have been good, some of them have been absolutely shocking, and I put that as the Worcester Street layout. Even last night, commuting home, there were cars blocking 1 or 2 of the speed humps. That put my life in danger. Yet there is continued excuses put from staff of there's no budget, which highlights a fundamental problem with the Capital Works program, that no budget was provisioned for remediation. It highlights that designers failed in their jobs to provide suitable and practical design and mitigate against foreseeable future impacts. You look at the east, it's with the intensified housing. The Greenway is not suitable for that. It's absolutely shocking. You need something of a higher calibre, and given the proximity to the CBD, to the stadium in the future, and the event centre and the pools, having a greenway with speed humps, glorified speed humps, is not practical and sensible. I've been nearly hit by a rubbish truck on that layout. I've raised it to 2 of the councillors and yourself, Mayor, and I get constant excuses from staff because they don't want to touch it. It's negligence. It's incompetence. We need to address shit design as a nutshell. You also highlight about deferring differential rates for businesses, commercial land. Yet we still have the dirty 30 list or something, yet a lot of it still sits vacant, undeveloped. And there's the excuse of, oh, wait till resource consent's granted. To be honest, they should only have it once construction starts. It's been how long since the quakes? Over 10 years. And yet we've still got these vacant plots. We're still rebuilding. Yet Japan rebuilt bloody quick after the quakes and the tsunamis. Apart from bureaucratic red tape, we should be having development occurring. The city needs to prosper further and grow more. Yet we're held up by these properties and developments. And you look at Oxford, Terrace, Armagh, Colombo and Gloucester, where the Catholic Diocese is going to build. And there's parking lots either side of the empty basement, which is flooded because they had that art exhibit pouring water into it. How does that promote to the city of a vacant, empty lot, undeveloped? That looks a bit shit, to be honest. It shows we're still backwards thinking. We're not trying to encourage development in the city. We're not showing that the city has potential to do more. When you look at Eden Park, its development expo this morning, they're wanting to make that a big national stadium. Go figure. Shows Christchurch lagging behind. Really, I think you should just fix Worcester Street, remove the layout currently, because it is a problem, and I'll keep coming every time when I'll start raising issues to staff again, because it's I'm a user, and I'm disturbed as to how that layout ever existed without addressing such fundamental faults and issues that have occurred. And I have raised this to staff, and the head of transport is actively aware of these issues, as I've personally met with her. So it's negligence if nothing's been done, and I'd ask questions of staff, and heads should roll.
Good. Sarah, I'd like to ask you a question. And Jake, did you have one too? Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic. While we're still trying to do other stuff, in the meantime, we've had your submission and others that have mentioned the lack of enforcement when it comes to bikes parking, cars parking in cycle lanes, blocking them, making it dangerous because cyclists have to go on the road, that kind of stuff. We currently only fund parking enforcement kind of during office hours, whereas Wellington and Auckland fund them 24/7. Do you think we should be extending the amount of enforcement that we're able to do and actually get people out there and ticket people who are, forcing you into the road?
So shouldn't that be incorporated with the designs potentially? Because that is a problem. Yeah. If it's only limited to daylight hours, 9 to 5, that is a huge problem. And that does put people's lives at risk. Yeah, but like
even in completely separated cycleways, we're getting cars parking in them.
So it's educating.
So we need more,
educating and designers, not residents and users. As the issues on Worcester Street never occurred prior to the layout. So the only thing that's changed is the layout itself. So we should not be blaming residents and users.
Yeah, thank you. Tyler, and then Jake, and that'll do.
Kia ora, Dominic. Just one question really is where is it exactly that are the pinch points for...
From Fitzgerald Avenue intersection right through to the England Street layout was the section I ride, and along that entire stretch I've found issues on a regular basis ever since the speed humps were installed and the layout changes occurred.
Okay, and it's the whole layout itself?
Whole layout. Yep.
Thank you. And Jake?
Just wanting to make sure, I think Phil and I have had a couple of thoughts about how we could improve the layout, but really is the optimum solution a dedicated, separated cycleway along that route?
Potentially, yes. With the infill housing, I've seen multiple townhouses pop up along that street and the businesses on Stanmore Road occur. And reality is designers should have almost foreseen that as part of their jobs in designing it, which would raise more questions. I'd be more than available to help with addressing the issues that have occurred and highlighting them to designers and staff more, as I feel that the auditors only drive down the road and don't actually experience it from a cyclist perspective. And I've been riding it ever since it got installed, and I feel unsafe, and I'm a competent cyclist. So,
okay. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. And I assume that Joseph is hiding up the back. How are you, mate? Come down and have a yarn to us, mate.
Kia ora koutou city councillors. I'm just here to emphasise the need for as many cycleways as possible to be built as quickly as possible to as high a standard as possible. The need might not be evident to those of you who don't cycle, and given the state of some of our infrastructure, I can't really blame you if you don't. And I do deeply respect and admire those of you who do cycle regularly. And there's a real and pressing need for more infrastructure. I cycle almost every day to get to where I need to go, and it just doesn't feel safe at all. In the past couple of weeks, I've been intimidated, I've been run off the road, been chased by a guy on his horn who wanted to swear at me a little bit, called me a, profanity allowed? He called me a fucking retard.
Okay, we won't go there anymore. Yep.
Well, I have to. It's
carry on.
I'd have to go along that route in future. It's how I got to the supermarket, so it was pretty unpleasant. A couple of months ago, my friend was struck by a motor car in broad daylight in full compliance with the cycling code as he was going through a roundabout, and he suffered a concussion that put him a couple of weeks behind on his uni work and cost him an expensive trip to a medical centre. Everyone in the city deserves to feel safe, and our current cycling infrastructure just doesn't provide it. And what could be more important for the council than reducing injuries and death for the people of the city and helping us feel safe? In the draft annual plan, I noticed a suggestion to delay and change the design of Wheels to Wings, and neither should happen. Every day that it's not built as a protected cycle lane is a signal to cyclists that our lives aren't valued. When the countervailing concern is, on-street parking, how can the conclusion be anything but that cyclists' lives should be protected? And in fact, it's going to make life easier for drivers. The simple fact is that cars move faster than bikes, and by having us out of the traffic lanes and in the cycle lanes, where we'll be free to travel at the speeds that we want to go and safe from, opening car doors, because the fact is that with the painted cycleways, cars do park in them, then drivers will be able to drive, as fast as they want to go in the traffic lanes, while cyclists are safe. And there are concerns, that protected cycleways are going to reduce custom for businesses, but there have been plenty of studies, including an NZTA one, which looked at Christchurch itself, which found that it doesn't reduce custom to build cycleways, it actually increases it. And, business concerns should actually be secondary to safety. As I said, cycling isn't safe, and it just doesn't feel safe. And personally, I won't be travelling along the specific proposed route of Wheels to Wings any longer, though a few years ago in high school I did semi-regularly to meet friends. And I don't think you really want to be putting any future high school kids in the position of going along a dangerous road and risking being hit by a car just to meet their friends. And I just sincerely hope that you guys are going to prioritise safety going forward. And I just can't stress enough that on-street parking is not an important enough concern to balance against lives and cyclists' wholeness of body. On-street parking is just so asymmetrically compared to lives and wholeness of body that it shouldn't even be relevant. And even if it were true that cycle lanes reduce custom for businesses, it wouldn't matter. It would be a moral duty to protect the lives of cyclists, even if God himself, parked a fancy sports car beside your business and brought in billions of dollars every day. It would still be the right thing to do to get rid of his on-street parking if it preserved life. And it will. Big pardon? I said, fair enough, good point. Right. Protected cycleways are not, an abstract and theoretical amenity. They allow us to feel safe. And in a time of climate crisis, when it's more important than ever that we get people into active modes of transport and out of their cars, cyclists have to feel safe and protected by these cycleways. It's more important than ever. And, until we can feel safe, people just aren't going to bike. Thank you, City Councillors.
Right, I have two questions. Andre and Victoria.
Thank you very much. Just picking up on your point around Wheels to Wings. So we had a submission a couple of days ago. A submitter suggested that cyclists on Harewood Road can just use
could just use common sense, and that a cycle lane would jeopardise motorists, particularly those in the trades. And they also said that parents probably choose to drive their kids to school because they would like them to get there safely, which is why they don't currently bike on Harewood Road. What would your response be to those thoughts?
Well, the first
or
thing,
these types of thoughts?
The first thing is that I believe it doesn't actually take away traffic lanes except for a very short stretch. So it's not actually going to change things for motorists for most of its length. And the other thing is that they're probably right to be afraid. Until we can get these protected cycleways in, they would be fully within their rights. You know, it would be fully reasonable for them to be driving their kids to school.
Until you build the cycleway.
Until you build the cycleways.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, and Victoria, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph, for taking the time to come and present your submission today. Are you prepared to tell us which part of town you live in?
Yes.
Where do you live?
I live in Russley.
Lovely. And are you likely to use this cycle lane to get to work or for...
No, I'll be crossing it socially, you know, sometimes, but I won't be going along its length, and I won't be using it all that regularly on a daily basis.
I acknowledge your concerns. I'm interested in your thoughts around what part you think driver education has in terms of cycle safety.
It's an interesting concern, but ultimately I think it's just a design issue. The design promotes certain behaviours. You know, the way that we design our roads puts the flow of cars first and above all other concerns. So until that sort of thing can change, then driver education is not going to be operative in increasing cycle safety, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Why?
Oh, Joseph, did I hear you right saying that as a high school student you used to bike on on that road?
Yes.
Yeah, and that you'd have liked protection at that time.
That would have been nice. I didn't really feel safe having to avoid parked cars banked up with their car doors able to open on me at any second.
So you're really here talking for other people, not necessarily just for yourself.
Yeah, the fact is that I'm no longer going to use it with any particular frequency. I used it in the past, and I just don't think that other cyclists in the future should necessarily have the same risk when there's an opportunity that's so clear now to decrease the risk and make it safer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
And lastly for today, Leiling, please. Thank you for coming in a wee bit earlier.
No worries. I apologise to Joseph for walking in the middle of his speaking.
No, you're right. You're right.
We'll just start now. Okay. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Lang Stanbury. I am part of Greening the Red Zone, and I am here to speak on their behalf as well as my own. Right, so we all know that Christchurch was built on floodplains and swamps. We all know that a swamp is just a place that gravity fills with water whenever it rains. This means that many parts of Christchurch are flooded whenever it rains. Now, there has been extensive research done and practical ways of fighting flooding. Stop banks right up close to the water's edge don't work. We have seen that throttling our wide braided river systems into one narrow channel just builds up sediment in that riverbed as the river has no access to its floodplain to overflow and drop its gravel onto. I remember when the Ashley River flooded and burst its banks, and one of the farmers was quoted in the press as saying, "It's not a flooding issue, it's a sediment issue. The riverbed is getting choked up with gravel," and absolutely right, but of course they stopped short of saying why the riverbed was getting choked up with gravel. With the stop banks right there, there was nowhere else for the river to put its sediment. But of course no one wants to shift the stop banks out by even a metre, or even just punch some holes in the stop bank to let the water through, because that floodplain is land that could be used or abused without any thought of future ramifications. So we know that taking a river's floodplain away from it forces us to either waste time and money dredging the river, which is expensive and also terrible for the river's ecosystem, by the way, or we keep building the stop banks higher and higher, even after the riverbed is higher than the floodplain, causing massive issues when, not if, it bursts its banks. Science has shown time and again that it is completely impractical to try to fight nature, or in this case even just to try to fight gravity. You cannot force tons and tons of water plus the sediment it carries into narrow channels. Even with the most expensive pumps technology can give us, this is a disaster waiting to happen. The only practical way of dealing with flooding is giving the water somewhere to go that gravity will take it without us having to try and fail to pump it there. I am talking, of course, about wetlands. We need a lot of wetlands to prevent flooding. A lot of our wetlands have been drained and built on. I have been asked more than once, why do we need so many wetlands? And my answer to that question is, where else are you going to put all of this water, and how exactly do you think you are going to get it there? This is what happens when you build in a floodplain. Sure, technology is great, but it isn't magic. We as humans need to get over our own pride and hubris and realize that you cannot fight nature, you cannot fight physics. And yes, I'm sorry, we do actually really need to reinstate all of our wetlands. We need to work with nature rather than against it. This is not just some hippie dream. This is backed by logic. This is backed by science and plain common sense. There is going to become more of a problem as climate change continues. For years, scientists have been telling us that climate change will bring more extreme weather events, and we have seen this happening very recently in Auckland. We are not prepared. Climate change is not just coming in the future. It is here. It is happening right now. So with this in mind, I was incredibly disappointed to hear the proposal to defer the Waitaki stormwater wetlands. The Waitaki Storm Basin is critical infrastructure because it is designed to help address flooding in that area. We need this built yesterday, not deferred. Flooding issues will only get worse, and if you defer this, you will be responsible for massive loss of people's possessions and even possibly lives, as people tend to be more prone to sickness when their houses get flooded. In the long run, it will be much cheaper to build the infrastructure now rather than forking out tons of money out after disaster. We need flood prevention right now. We also need to do everything we possibly can to reduce climate change. Studies show that if we put more safe cycleways in, more people will start biking. Also, putting in more bus lanes and routes will encourage more people to bus and reduce congestion on roads far more effectively than just building another lane. So I am absolutely livid that anyone would consider deferring Avon Otakaro commuter route to the east at the same time as deferring Wheels to Wings MCR. Cycleways and stormwater treatment wetlands should be the highest priority. I would like to state for the record, I am a ratepayer, and I would love it if you actually upped my rates and prioritised mitigating the effects of climate change and reducing climate change. The corners we are cutting to save money are the very foundation that we as a city, as a people, depend on. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. You're spot on for timing. So Sarah would obviously like to say that.
Oh, it's just that that's... No, I'm just saying that that's much more detailed than your written submission. Are you able to send that through so it could be logged with the rest of it? That's all. Because you've got it on paper there. So
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. And thank you very much, Leiling, for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in early. Thank you. Okay, guys, we're done. But I would just, once we're offline, I'll just talk to you about a couple of people that I talked to the other day. I'd just like to bring you up to speed.
For our residents.
Yep.
Yep.